Welcome to Module 4 of the course entitled Competence Management and Competence Sourcing. I will briefly introduce this theme by three interrelated topics. I'm going to start off with discussing competence management as a central process for the organization, move on to tell you a little bit about the type of IT support that exists today for competence management. And finally, I will move on to discuss some of the design challenges that I personally have found in this area through my own research. So, competence management is definitely something that is of growing interest to many organizations. It's of course based on the fact that there is a widespread awareness that it's important for any knowledge-intensive firm to constantly develop and nurture the skills, knowledges and competences of its staff members. And what typically happens when you try to address this in a structured way is that you try to implement various types of standardized processes with the aim to plan, manage and control this fairly difficult issue. Not seldom is this the responsibility for the human resource department or in some cases even a responsibility directly for the top management of the organization. Having said that, I should start with pointing to the fact that trying to plan, manage and control an organization's competence is based on the idea that competences can be articulated and formalized into various types of systems. And we see over and over that this is often very, very difficult to achieve. But I will come back to that aspect. If you look at these structures or competence management processes, they most typically are cyclic of nature. Maybe with annual circles so that things are constantly repeated. Some maybe with a shorter time interval, but more or less repeats itself year after year after year. And one of the things that we typically want to do is to have the possibility to describe and articulate what set of competencies are needed for a certain role. These profiles then describe what are the competencies that we like to see in, for instance, a project manager, what are the competencies we like to see in a middle manager, in a technical expert, and so on and so forth. One of the core things that we want to do in competence management is to identify what are the existing level of competence throughout the organization, and then we want to define what do we perceive as the wanted or desired level of competence, and we want to assess then the gap between what's now and what do we want. And of course, if you have a description of the members of the competences of the members of the organization, this can also be used when you want to staff or put people into a certain project or a new team, so that the collective set of competencies are complementary and works for the best. Then again, about these gaps, of course, you want the competence management processes to give support for how to close these gaps. Should we train the staff educate them and therethrough elevate their competencies? Should we recruit new people? Should we collaborate with other firms that have the competencies we ourselves lack? And so on and so forth. This splash screen is from unfortunately in Swedish, but I will translate the central things for you. It shows really how high up on the agenda the competence management is today. The first thing I've circled here would translate into investments in competence pays off. And it's a featured article about giving examples of organizations that really have put a lot of resources into competence management with a good with a good profit in the end. The other circle here is a piece about competence, a strategic issue. And if you click this link, you can download various tools and templates that a firm can use in order to get started with a strategic work towards competence management. The third example may be not what you would suspect, but I think it's very enlightening. It shows this, which is a job ad, where if I translate this, it would say, decisive enterprise architect with total overview wanted. And for me, this is a good example exactly of how extremely difficult it is to articulate and formulate competencies into words. And I'm sure in your experiences as well, difficult things often come out almost funny when you try to put them down into a job ad. Okay, let's move on then to the IT support that's supposed to help us with this difficult task. These systems are all based on the idea that the competence of an individual is something that can be broken down into a set of sub-competencies. So for instance, my competence could be described as on the one hand side, my technical competence, my communicative competence, my business competence, and maybe my social competence. And each one of these can then in turn be divided into other subcategories. This example shows how the communicative skills can be divided into, on the one hand, how my competence of spoken language, and then on the other hand, written language. And then for each of those categories, you can come up with a lot of subcategories that are different in nature of spoken communication as well as written communication. What you do in a competence management system is that you use numeric values to assess each of these bottom level nodes, so that I would get perhaps a 4 on my spoken communication skills in customer meeting. I would get a 3 in doing a project pitch. I would get a 5 in writing a white paper, and so on and so forth. And all these numeric values, which is assessed in one way or another, together builds the structure of my competence profile. And if you think of competence this way, which is imposed by the systems, I would list for you a number of potential difficulties or potential hazards with this way of thinking. I think it drives, first and foremost, it drives our way of thinking of competences as something that always has to do how I did in the past. It does not have the possibility to look to the future. And I think it's a bit risky to think that if I performed well or performed competent in the past, that means that I automatically will perform competent in the future. The second thing is of course really important as well, the fact that if you start putting grades on competencies on an abstracted level, you lose the connection to the situation and the context. If I start thinking of my social competence as having 4 regardless of situation and context, to me that becomes fairly unprecise. My spoken communication skills from one situation to another can vary to a very large extent, for instance. It also comes with the idea that competencies always grows over time. These systems have the underlying idea that competencies should always be increased, whereas we know that that is not the case. I can very easily lose my ability to perform competent in a situation from one time to another. And most importantly, I think it drives the idea that each of the sub-competencies are independent and does not have an overlap or any interrelations at all. It's a fragmented way of looking at competencies, which I think is problematic to some extent. Because what we all know is that if I'm going to be a competent actor, it all depends on the situation, the task, and more so, what tools do I have at hand? Do I have the right tools in order to act competent? And what personal resources, co-workers and personal networks do I have access to help me act competent? So, as a design challenge then, I think for me an insight that has grown over the years is that competence management system is a good illustration of how we tend to put structure over service. That is, we first think of how we can deconstruct and categorize things, and after that we start thinking of what can we use all this information for. So all existing system, in my thinking, falls into this pitfall. Its structure is put before service. So all energy goes into feeding these systems with data, and very little comes out in terms of something that is good for the organization. I have often illustrated this with a kind of a monster metaphor. The system becomes monsters that you constantly have to feed with data without any value-adding services being able to come out in the other end. So these two things, structure and service, needs to be balanced. And I think if anything, you should start in the other end. Start with what do we want to have the system for? Do we want to have it for gap analysis, role profile descriptions, and so on and so forth? And how much do we need to structure the information in order to make it possible for doing these services? And as a final word, I think putting structure over service is once again falling into the trap of not realizing the laws of nature, where entropy, the number of or the level of chaos or order, should always be respected. Whenever you try to make too much local structure and order, it can only be achieved on the cost of a larger chaos in a global context. And with that, I thank you very much.